Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to TBR's webinar with Hybrid IT as Customer's End Goal. Opportunities are abundant. I'm Justin Surgent. I'm hosting today's session. TBR's Hybrid IT and Hybrid Cloud research highlights trends driving 2015 revenue and evolving trends that will drive success. Vendors with broad portfolios spanning on-premise and cloud, including IBM, Microsoft, and HP, are leading the hybrid market today. But the question is, will this trend continue? Insights from today's presentation are from our Hybrid Cloud Customer Research, which surveys over 2,200 cloud customers annually across North America, Western Europe, and emerging Asia Pacific. If you'd like to learn more about this report, please reach out to myself or one of the analysts after the presentation. Now, before we begin the webinar, there are a few housekeeping items I'd like to cover. First, we'll be recording today's session and posting it on our YouTube site, TBRI channel. If you'd like, please feel free to visit our channel to view this presentation or any of the previous presentations we recorded. Second, we'd like to hear your thoughts and opinions on what we're presenting. Please send any questions you have through the Q&A function, and we'll get through as many as we can at the end of the presentation. And finally, I'll be following up with all of you within 24 hours of the conclusion of the event with the previously mentioned recording link as well as the slides from today's webinar. So please be on the lookout for in your email for that. Now let me introduce the analyst presenting today. Allan Krans is a principal analyst in TBR's cloud practice and leads the coverage of technologies and business models at play across the cloud computing landscape. Allan is the content editor of TBR's Hybrid Cloud Customer Research. Jillian Mirandi is a senior analyst in TBR's cloud practice and is responsible for analyzing key vendors in the market. Jillian is the lead author on several TBR syndicated reports and benchmarks, including the Hybrid Cloud Customer Research. So with that, let me hand this over to the analyst.
Thanks, Justin. Thanks for everybody for joining for today's session as well. Today we'll go through highlights from what we're seeing in terms of the hybrid cloud and hybrid IT markets. So what you'll see here is largely pulling from our customer adoption study that wrapped up and was published in June and drew from research that had been done over the first half of 2015. And so with today's session, really want to start with the overall in terms of the title of the presentation and then hit on the trends, customer landscape, and wrap up with the vendor assessment in terms of who customers are working with for their early hybrid implementations. So when we look at the conversations we're having with customers and the focus for the ways that they're using cloud, it really has been a growing focus on hybrid over the course of the last 2 years, really, in terms of largely how to get started. But now, as the market is beginning to mature, we're starting to see some use cases, best practices in terms of where hybrid fits, the benefits that it can bring, and at the same time where it doesn't fit. But overall, more expertise in terms of how to achieve hybrid implementations. Now, from the vendor side, where we see the opportunity coming in is even for some of the customers that we've been interacting with that have been very advantageous about how to use hybrid, have gone beyond initial deployments for the combination of cloud to cloud or cloud to on-prem, still not an easy path by any means. And that for the majority of vendors, they're looking for third parties to come in and help with platforms and services and structured capabilities so that they can both integrate the technologies but also really make the best use of the different clouds that are available and optimize where public is used, where private is used, and where the on-prem assets are really the best approach forward. So still a lot of difficulty there, and I think that's where we see for vendors the opportunities really increasing in terms of how to enable hybrid deployments for more customers and for more use cases within those customers. So I kind of start with an overall perspective of what do we see as the effective messages and strategies for how to capitalize on hybrid given what we're seeing in the customer environment. I think overall, when we look at cloud from a higher level perspective, that in a lot of ways, customers have gotten the benefits that they've sought with their individual cloud services, whether it be doing test and dev on the cloud in a public environment, consuming public applications, having a hosted environment that's running certain applications for them. Customers are increasingly proficient in terms of how to take a workload-specific view, leverage cloud resources where they're appropriate, and have that as part of their overall IT environment. Where we see that kind of leveling off and where the opportunity for hybrid fits in is the ability to not be tied into a single delivery method is really something that's very attractive for a lot of customers, that they're able to extend those benefits of cloud by looking at certain portions of workloads, certain use cases for, for instance, development, but not have to take an all or nothing approach in terms of the flavor of cloud that's being selected, and also how that can fit into what they're doing today. And so overall, I really think it's an extension of the benefits that cloud can bring. And there's a couple things that are kind of driving the behavior that are relevant for vendors that are looking at this as an opportunity and really embracing a hybrid approach to delivering hybrid cloud solutions for customers. First is around cost, and although we've seen an evolution from the early days of cloud where it really was all about cost and shifting CapEx to OpEx, for a lot of the cloud services, it's gotten to a broader evaluation in terms of business benefits, agility, and flexibility. And that with hybrid, it kind of brings back some of those cost advantages that with the ability to both connect and manage the environment from an IT perspective, you can all of a sudden use cloud services in ways that hadn't been possible within organizations before. And so it can, again, bring in some of those OpEx benefits that and cost reduction benefits that still are an important part of cloud evaluation, although, as I said, we have seen much more complex consideration for how cloud fits in. Second big area that hybrid can deliver for customers and that is an entry point for vendors is in this whole idea of portability and avoiding a lot of the vendor lock-in that, again, was one of the attractive propositions for the early days of cloud, being able to get outside of those traditional vendors that have very long maintenance contracts and have a lot of barriers to exit for customers, provide them more options in terms of the types of solutions and the types of vendors to work with. A lot of customers have run into the same issues with their cloud environments, that as they've grown over time, they have become increasingly locked in to different cloud services, and that with the shift in focus towards more open standards, portability of applications, those are all things that we don't ever see it being a case where for most customers they're seamlessly transitioning services from one cloud to another or from on-prem into a cloud environment. I think there's always complexity that will stand in the way of that very seamless experience that customers might like, but they do want to more and more have at least some level of flexibility built in, so that as things change, as their needs evolve or as the cost for the services changes, that they do have some level of standards and management that enables them to migrate from different services and off different services. And so certainly from a vendor standpoint, we're seeing more and more, even the traditional vendors, supporting things like OpenStack and Docker and containers that enable that type of behavior on behalf of customers. And then lastly, from an opportunity standpoint, most customers are not going to get there alone, and that they are looking for third parties to enable part of that hybridization of their infrastructure. And that right now the consideration ranges from custom service engagements, platforms that they manage themselves, brokerage type arrangements. There's a lot of different ways, but it all gets back to helping customers simplify what's become an increasingly complex cloud environment overall, and that once they move into a hybrid type environment, the requirements for management and the level of skill required to do that all themselves is something that for most customers they're not looking to take on. And so having something where a value proposition that helps them offset and overcome, more customers will eventually be able to implement hybrid solutions that deliver the benefits of cost and flexibility, but that they don't have to take all of that risk and ownership to enable the transition onto their own organization. And so those are really kind of the overall themes that we're seeing in terms of what customers are looking for from vendors, and what are the gaps today in terms of the vendor offerings and the vendor approaches for hybrid cloud. So transitioning to a little bit of a landscape view for when we look at the cloud market overall, how does hybrid fit into the overall picture? You can see that for the large enterprise survey that we conduct as part of the hybrid cloud report, about a quarter of customers have some type of hybrid implementation within their organization that's combining cloud-to-cloud integrations, cloud-to-on-prem integrations, and that it's overall, a slowly growing portion of the market. I think a lot of that reflects for, you have a certain population in the enterprise space that is mature both with their use of public and private cloud, and that have moved initially into a hybrid use case, but also a lot of organizations that are still, trying to figure out how they can effectively manage what's the true benefit of hybrid. A lot of customers are still not very articulate in terms of either as we're talking with them, what the benefits of hybrid would be, and so the ability to sell that within the organization and really change the culture in terms of yet another technology change for how IT is delivered is a difficult thing. The only other thing to highlight on this slide is when we looked at the percentage of large enterprises that don't have broad use of cloud within their organizations, maybe still some shadow IT activity, that type of thing, but from an institutional standpoint, we saw a dramatic drop from the end of last year to this year. So overall, we are seeing much more unanimous usage of some type of cloud within most of the organizations that are large enterprises that we're interacting with as part of this study. So we've talked a little bit about the approach points for hybrid and the ways that vendors can effectively message to capitalize on it. When we take a step back and look at what is the size of that opportunity, just to kind of put things in perspective, you can see that for the larger opportunity remains the public cloud on the left, the $80 billion this year, and then the private cloud, either the components for on-prem delivery or the hosted private cloud environments, still the more sizable portions of this market. However, as you look at the investment in terms of the management platforms, services, the tools to really enable a hybrid cloud environment that connects multiple different cloud services together, starts to shape a real opportunity for vendors to come in and be able to capitalize on that, deliver platforms and tools and services that address the difficult need of customers to really get both the back end as well as the ongoing management of that hybridization in place. And then the opportunity, we believe, grows exponentially as we start to look at the influence and the pull-through revenue in terms of public and private as part of that overall environment. We're starting to model out more of what that broader impact is, but based on the adoption numbers, we feel comfortable saying that roughly 10% of the opportunity for both public and private is in fact influenced by hybrid, is being deployed as a multi-cloud environment, And so when you look at addressing what then is approaching a $25 billion piece of the cloud market, again, it becomes very significant for vendors to be able to both deliver the integration as well as influence the way that public and private in and of themselves are delivered and consumed by customers. Another useful perspective, particularly for going forward in terms of looking at the size of the opportunity and how hybrid fits into how customers are planning to use different cloud services going forward. When we look at, so this chart depicts for customers both today, which is the darker bar, as well as their plans in 2018 for of the workloads that they're running within their IT environment, what percentage do they see as being delivered through a hybrid delivery method, hybrid IT, which combines both cloud to cloud as well as cloud to on-prem. And you start to get a sense for, over time, what we're seeing is a little bit of a resetting of expectations if you look at the more than 75% and the more than the 51 to 75%, a dramatic drop in terms of customers that are saying that over time they're going to be all in around a hybrid deployment, that every workload is going to be integrated and centrally managed and flexible in terms of where the resources are coming from. And so, really for the majority of customers today and as well as in 2018, they are going to be somewhere in the middle in terms of a sizable portion will leverage hybrid deployment, but it's not going to be all or nothing. But then also on the other end of the spectrum, most customers see this as a fit for a sizable portion of the workloads that they're going to be running. So I think the impact of hybrid, the at least capability of moving services and workloads around based on resource constraints or compliance concerns, is something that they see as a fit for a sizable portion of the workloads. And so that kind of highlights, the role of hybrid and that opportunity, which customers expect to grow over time and really be a sizable portion of their IT investment through 2018. Getting a little bit deeper in terms of, so if customers are hybridizing, how are they actually doing that? What types of packaging are they leveraging in terms of how to accomplish the integration either across or within different workloads? And so starting at the top, custom integrations really are the biggest portion of investment in how customers are achieving the hybridization of their environments today. And that as you go through, really the middle tier of solutions are either a software platform that enables it, it's a pre-built integration delivered with a cloud service. We see this a lot with the big cloud applications, that there are pre-built integrators to connect between different applications or different infrastructure platforms. And so those are all, fairly well established today in terms of how customers are getting started. But that the one that really lags, although it did increase in early 2015, is this concept of an entirely pre-built cloud environment that combines public, private, on-prem a lot of times. It's a staple of the approach for some of the larger vendors like Microsoft, IBM, even Cisco, and that, over time, I think certainly there's a lot of benefits to taking that approach and for customers to standardize, but it does fly in the face a little bit of that desire for portability, choice, lack of vendor lock-in. So I think, open standards and, clear migration paths off of some of those end-to-end pre-built environments is an important kind of balance to that kind of all-in vendor strategy where customers would be selecting a single vendor for more of their investment, more of their cloud workloads as part of the hybridization of how they're delivering those services. And so that wraps up kind of that overall perspective on the opportunity, the ways that vendors can go and address that. The next thing we want to dive just a little bit more deeply into, because we did touch on it a little bit in that first section, is a view into that customer landscape and the types of use cases, workloads that are being used, because we really do see it starting with a lot of infrastructure focus today, but certainly building towards more of the application integration, hybridization, things that touch much more deeply to the line of business and the core of the actual business for customers, but we just see that taking more time, and we'll go through some of those challenges that customers are facing as they attempt to get to that type of use case within their organizations. So here we have the order. So we asked folks, in what order, does your organization prefer to hybridize its workloads? We did include some infrastructure workloads to account for shared infrastructure, disaster recovery, backup, those types of things that cut across more of the vertical applications and tie more closely to the IT infrastructure teams than the apps teams. And you can see a clear preference for starting with things that are lower risk, more infrastructure focused, doing load balancing, connections to address different compliance concerns. Those are all common scenarios that we saw in terms of how customers want to get started and the logical first steps for implementing a hybrid approach within their organizations. The third workload, I think, again, is a very important one because we've seen a lot of focus from some of the vendor side around how to offer flexibility in terms of how development platforms are delivered and the amount of control that the organizations can have over the underlying platform, as well as leveraging some of their on-prem assets today for certain portions of the development activity are all common scenarios and areas of interest for those teams in terms of hybridize, and we've seen more activity on the vendor side to address that, to not just force customers into a public or nothing environment for development, particularly as they get into things like app customization, and we'll show some of those subcategory workloads in just a moment. And then a little bit on the applications in terms of a fair amount of focus in terms of the systems management, infrastructure management dashboards, being deployment that balances different delivery methods depending on use case, different teams, but still being able to connect those so that you get that centralized view. And then as we get into the core applications, productivity seems like a logical choice, but then also looking at some of the activity in human resource management in terms of and what we saw there in some of the interviews was there's certainly differences in terms of a public-facing part of that with recruiting, and then balancing that with some of the more sensitive activities around payroll and management reviews and all those other things that have sensitive data associated with them. So the desire for some flexibility in terms of differences for what's actually going on within some of the subcategories within the HR workload. So here's an illustration of some of the examples for the subcategories that we asked folks about as part of their overall deployment and the use of hybrid cloud within some of the broader categories. So I'll call out a couple. Within test and dev, I mentioned differences in terms of the types of development activities that are being done. And you can see that for customizing applications doing development, that really knits it back to their business process, their vertical. Those types of modules and activities are seen as a much better fit for something where you'd want to balance different delivery methods instead of having either a purely private purely on-prem or a purely public type environment. And then also on the right-hand side, one of the views that we've been looking at and gauging for both the hybridization as well as the trend around cloud brokerage is what are the differences by app versus infrastructure versus platform in terms of the desire for activities around those areas and the differences in terms of use cases. So it stuck out to us is if you look at the overall management of app infrastructure, IT help desk, the application management actually stuck out in terms of an area where you'd want to have a use case to combine multiple different delivery methods, a little bit more than infrastructure or help desk type use cases. So in terms of a targeting, a messaging, being able to message effectively to that subcategory use case, and it also changes the teams that are involved in terms of the evaluation and the implementation, because we do see still a lot of fragmentation between the infrastructure folks, the app folks, the platform folks. The approach is much more complex than just the IT organization, and so I think that's important from a hybrid targeting perspective. So that gives us a little bit more detail in terms of how customers are using it, the types of use cases. Certainly we're seeing, I think overall with use cases, a shift in focus from, I think there's a number of examples that have been circulated in terms of how it can be used. The difficulty that's come up with some of the vendor briefings that we've been doing is that use cases are actually not enough for most customers, that it goes beyond just having an example for how hybrid can be used. Hybrid for most customers is really about meeting them where they're at, leveraging the existing infrastructure, keeping in place a lot of the cloud services that they've implemented over the past couple of years and are getting use from. And so with that in mind, it really is about providing a use case, but then some flexibility, some customization, some additional modularization that allows them to actually tie it back to their unique perspective and status in terms of cloud migration, and that very few customers are cookie cutter and the same. And so we've been hearing more and more that use case has been the buzzword for a while, but in the field, it's all about having enough flexibility and customization to really take it beyond that and tie it back to different customers, their own unique perspective, and being able to sell that as part of the overall case for how hybrid could benefit them rather than continuing on the independent cloud migration path. So we'll jump into some of what we're seeing in terms of feedback for who customers are thinking about using for hybrid IT services. This chart starts with really the overall perspective of, if you look at it from an on-prem perspective, cloud perspective, integration perspective, who are the vendors that are coming up more often than others in terms of delivering across that spectrum and being able to capitalize on that opportunity. And so, when you look at kind of starting at the top going down, we do see Microsoft actually picking up a lot of momentum with connections between the Azure platform, on-prem assets, and now even with some of the partner-delivered Azure services, really being able to deliver a broad variety, as well as some flexibility. Although we still see that perception that Microsoft shops are more likely to stick with Microsoft in the migration to the cloud, that they're working on it, still trying to open it up to net new customers that aren't sold traditionally on Microsoft. Still a challenge for them, but from a breadth of portfolio perspective, you can see they certainly are getting traction in terms of being able to connect the on-prem legacy strengths over to a cloud environment and using hybrid, really to their advantage, because with some of the pure play cloud vendors that are key Microsoft overall competition in certain areas, they lack the ability to really come in with that same level of value proposition. And then IBM, I think, is a good example of, yes, both the breadth of the portfolio, but also being more aggressive in terms of enabling choice for customers, support of OpenStack, support of Docker, and leveraging, really playing up that concept of minimizing vendor lock-in, even though in reality, we think that most customers, again, are not going to really be able to achieve that seamless flexibility and change based on, short-term changes in price or features or capacity, but they do want that overall, and it is a selling feature, even if over time, the same type of vendor lock-in does kind of creep in just based on usage and skills within the organization. So I think that's a good example of how they're leveraging that message and support of open source to their advantage, showing up pretty strongly. And then lastly, if we look at a vendor that we looked at with a lot of legacy assets, a lot of legacy strength in EMC, but also a lot of capabilities that reside out in the federated set of companies, doing a much more effective job in terms of knitting that together, telling a more cohesive story around hybrid, and starting to see that if you connect all the dots between VMware and EMC in terms of the chart, not a bad job in terms of taking, really growing that visibility and usage for hybrid services, hybrid deployment, using that broader set of assets that they have. And then lastly, the challenge for some of the pure cloud vendors, looking at Google, AWS, to really take an alliance-based approach to leverage their service partners, to leverage their integration partners so that they too can capitalize on this market. And it's just been, it'll be more of an uphill battle for them to knit that together. We do think over time, though, that as they're able to effectively demonstrate the hybrid delivery capabilities of their partners, that it will have influence, revenue, and benefits for them in terms of still focusing on those public cloud workloads, but being pulled into much more hybrid environments and being able to drive their business through that new delivery and distribution method. So here we want to just kind of highlight, not just how the vendor showed up, but also some of the strategies that they're using in terms of actually capitalizing on this. And, so I think as we talked on the previous slide, really, I think Microsoft is still emerging in terms of being able to connect the on-prem to certainly the partner-delivered Azure services over time. I think that's a growing strength for them. And one that will sustain their presence in terms of hybrid. For Salesforce, we mentioned some of those partners. I think MuleSoft is a great example of a partner, although we continue to see a lot of focus for the systems integrators in terms of developing a practice around the integration of Salesforce, the management of Salesforce, and that the managed services component for the public cloud vendors in that hybrid scenario is really, one of the use cases, particularly for large enterprises, where there's going to be a strong, connection. There's not going to be ongoing opportunity in that as they look to, really diverse environments for the largest enterprises, that the SIs are going to be part of enabling that hybrid infrastructure that pulls in vendors like Salesforce. And then lastly, we've talked a lot about the IT software and cloud connections, but also we're seeing this growing focus on the network and being able to not just integrate but also deliver through to the enterprise's private networks, that there's still gaps in terms of if it's going to be a truly hybrid environment, latency is going to be an issue. The performance of the network is going to become more important. And AWS is one of those vendors that has actually been more aggressive in terms of taking ownership of some of that, and that's a key piece for them in terms of hybrid. But we expect to see more focus from additional cloud vendors so that they can not only deliver the integration but ensure the network performance so that customers can use it for more use cases, have the performance they need as they look at some of these application type workloads that where latency and performance is more critical than for some of the public facing things around marketing and that type of use case. So to provide a little bit more detail in terms of where vendors showed up for within our study, you can see that within the application segment, and it goes back to, if you think about the focus around productivity being really the leading application workload, as well as some systems management capabilities. Microsoft shows up, IBM, HP with the systems management. We saw a lot of activity within our base this time actually around HP systems management in the cloud, in the hybrid delivery of those types of workloads. Within the platform, IBM, I think, has done a better job than a lot of other vendors in terms of both delivering flexibility for how their platform as a service can be consumed, as well as providing support for migration and the hybridization in terms of where certain portions of activities are developed in tests, and then also integrating that back into the overall usage for those customers. Within infrastructure, kind of interesting to see Microsoft, HP, and IBM show up on top, even though they may not be the largest in terms of infrastructure as a service overall. When you look at the on-prem installation of software, the enterprise focus for a lot of the customers that are part of the study, it just guides it towards that type of more mature use case where you're not going to see as much pure public cloud use of infrastructure as part of these hybrid environments because they're not able to deliver across that spectrum. And then lastly, in terms of the hybrid integration, the cast iron and WebSphere assets really show up a lot in terms of how the integration and management of these platforms are taking place. I do think that adding in, the caveat that a lot of it is taking place through custom services engagements, brokerage platforms increasingly, that you are going to see integration kind of blending a little bit into different managed services and platforms that customers can use. And so I think over time you will see that kind of graying of how integration is delivered. We've already seen it in some ways with modules that accompany certain applications from public cloud vendors, and so it becomes a little bit baked in, but we do see an enduring role for some of these standalone integration platforms and services and appliances just to kind of solidify the packaging for an enterprise-wide approach to the hybrid integration. And so let's see, so here's another view on the vendor side. If we look at, for the hybrid IT environments, so the on-premises hardware and software vendors that are taking an install base of traditionally delivered solutions, connecting it to different hybrid areas, but still leveraging an on-prem portion of it, which I think is going to be still significant. The most significant opportunity overall in terms of IT and the delivery of these solutions. Cloud overall is really a minority of customer investment in IT. So this is still a great market, as well as a great entry point for the vendors with a strong base to extend and hybridize, leveraging cloud assets. And so you can see Cisco with a lot of the, shows up in a lot of the networking, server hardware, and so certainly they're taking that and trying to leverage the intercloud strategy, connecting it to their partners' data centers, and so strong presence overall to build from, but even more to come as they really get the intercloud strategy up and rolling in a more significant way. And then the last one I'll call out is NetApp, who's done a fair amount of joint partnership type activity with public cloud vendors to have an interconnect and to deal with some of the latency and performance issues. And so two vendors right there that you wouldn't necessarily think of in terms of hybrid cloud, but are leveraging their on-prem approaches and strengths to capitalize on that and to have a point of value add in terms of the whole hybrid cloud movement. And then lastly, from a vendor perspective, we think that OpenStack overall is over time going to be a very important set of technology and standards for how clouds are delivered. It's obviously taken a while for a lot of customers to come and realize those benefits and really integrate it into the production environments for their cloud services. But when we look at the types of players that customers are looking for in terms of consuming, it could be a variety of services, not necessarily just a distribution, but tool sets, support, managed services over time. You can see that IBM, Cisco, Dell saw a big increase actually in the first half of this year. Intel with their participation in terms of the standards board, support from a hardware perspective continues to show up. And then three vendors really that showed big increases, VMware, HP Helion, and Red Hat. And so when we look at the overall change in terms of who vendors are looking or who customers are looking for, we are seeing a much more broader participation from more vendors. I think overall the push to make things OpenStack compliant, not necessarily everyone is going to be involved in delivering an OpenStack distribution, but it's shown that through services and platforms and support, there's a lot broader opportunity for vendors to capitalize on OpenStack, to participate in the delivery of an ecosystem around the core technologies. And so we think that all of those services and support are actually things that are accelerating the implementation and adoption of OpenStack for customers, that with different flavors of managed services support, they are able to get beyond some of the skills gaps that obviously exist, not just for cloud in general, but particularly for OpenStack, and that for some of the larger enterprises, they're going to rely on their service partners to at least temporarily overcome some of the obstacles, allow them to not have to invest in significant training initially, and take all of the risk on themselves in terms of getting the benefits of more standardization in terms of their own private cloud and the clouds that they're consuming from third parties. And so we think this vendor view is an important one in terms of how to best capitalize on what's for a long time been a theoretical opportunity, a theoretical standard for how clouds can be delivered. We see it actually accelerating quite rapidly in terms of customers moving forward with OpenStack as part of their environments, although it's still relatively small market overall. And so that wraps up the vendor view. At this point, I'll hand it back over to Justin, and we'll open it up for questions.
Just a quick reminder, if you have any questions, please send them to the Q&A function now. And with that, let's begin. So the first question, how were the percentages derived for cloud adoption and integration, referring to slide 5?
Sure. So this slide is from our survey. So if you're referring to the types of hybrid integration, so public to public, private to public, and private to private, those are questions we ask in our survey. We also, beyond that, look at it from a hybrid IT perspective. So we look at public cloud to on-prem, private cloud to on-prem, and then a mixture of the three different types of delivery. Right now, it's pretty interesting because all of the different types of hybrid delivery are relatively spread evenly. So I think there was 6 or 7 different combinations, and they're all pretty even, just showing that the market is still relatively new, and there's a lot of different opportunities for SIs or vendors to help customers migrate the appropriate workloads to the appropriate deployment methods.
All right, next question. You mentioned that open source software is valued for its flexibility. In the selection of an open hybrid solution, Red Hat wasn't in your vendor list. Can you explain your thinking about vendor relevance? Thank you.
Sure. So Red Hat is in the appropriate vendor lists. What we did is we have so many vendors, we're showing probably the top 20 or so that had at least 5 or so people choose them. So whereas Red Hat doesn't show up in this smaller vendor list, so the just infrastructure related list, those are just the top 5 vendors for hybrid cloud or hybrid IT. They do show up in the graph that is relevant to OpenStack. So who do you prefer? Who is your preferred OpenStack vendor? So it is in the list. It just wasn't. Is just not a leader in the hybrid cloud infrastructure.
All right, moving on to the next question here. What is holding back more customers from adopting hybrid implementations?
So I think, when we look at the customers that have cloud, haven't gotten to hybrid yet, I think in a lot of ways the management of those environments hasn't gotten to the point where they want to centralize, consolidate, be able to, for most customers that we've seen with hybrid, they either do it on a small scale with a certain application in Salesforce, Workday, AWS resources, that type of use case, or it's part of a much broader kind of rethinking of how cloud is used and the ways that they can match the right cloud solution to the right use case, and be able to ensure things like compliance, performance, as well as cost reduction if they're able to shift to a lower cost environment. And so for a lot of customers, they either haven't reached that point in terms of the maturity of the way that they're consuming cloud, or they haven't, from a organizational standpoint, seen the benefit of being able to consolidate or integrate, do analytics on centralized data from multiple sources. So I think it's either they're just not there in terms of the migration path or the culture within the organization in terms of how cloud is being used, or they've been piloting or looking at testing some specific use case, but haven't moved forward yet.
All right. Next question. How can the pure cloud vendors address customer needs for hybrid?
Sure. So we've seen, I think most recently, Google support OpenStack. Prior to this, the companies like Salesforce, they did support a lot of different integrations through partners like MuleSoft. So one of MuleSoft's most popular integration tools is connecting Salesforce to SAP, and they have similar connectors with Informatica and Salesforce. So that is one way. But again, I think the more interesting thing that's happened recently is Google support of OpenStack. So it just, as Allan was mentioning, it gives credibility to the whole OpenStack framework and movement. It seemed like prior to this, a lot of the more incumbent or traditional vendors supported OpenStack for customers who wanted to have the look and feel and the scalability of AWS, but individually, no vendors could really catch AWS. So collectively, they formed OpenStack and have been developing there. Now with Google supporting OpenStack, as well as Kubernetes for Docker, which is an open source container management program, Google, instead of having to build its own infrastructure, its own private cloud, its own, if it wanted to do on-premise for hybrid IT, now you can develop on Google, and it should be relatively simple to move those applications and run them on different types of private clouds and on-premise tools to also support OpenStack or Docker.
All right, I think we have time for one last question here. Is brokerage a real opportunity or something customers will do themselves over time?
I think so. So this gets at one of the ways that we're seeing, or we expect to see the hybridization of cloud environments grow is through a brokerage platform, brokerage services that aggregate, customize, combine different solutions together on behalf of a customer. And so those are all activities that, in a traditional sense, you could say that a lot of IT shops have done a lot of the integration and customization themselves over time. And we are seeing, so from the most recent brokerage study, we saw about a third of customers that are using it in some way. It could be, a lot of it starts with just kind of base level tracking, reporting, not really the true integration and management of multiple clouds together. But we do think that given the complexity of the environment, the growing need for the ongoing management of not just the hybrid integration, but billing and metering and tracking, those are all things that the internal IT shops, for the most part, don't have proficiency in doing, and that, yeah, a certain portion will, over time, take that on themselves, take that as part of the new role for the IT function within their organization. But we're looking at it as a significant opportunity, driven partly by hybrid, partly by just the complexity in terms of the environments and the management of them for a lot of customers. So I think, for a majority of, just like systems integration today is a big market for service providers, there's going to be a sizable portion of customers and organizations that are going to rely on brokerage services to help offset that complexity in the management going forward. So I don't think it's a market that's going to go away as customers become more proficient in terms of skills in managing and training.
All right, well, that's all we have for time today. So thank you, Allan and Jill, and thank you, everyone, for your questions. If we didn't get to one of your questions, we'll do our best to follow up with you. Excuse me. You can follow the Analyst as well as TBR on our numerous social media accounts here, so please do that. In addition, before you sign off, I'd like to ask you to take a very brief survey on today's presentation. We're always looking to improve both the information we provide and how we provide it. So with that, thank you for attending and have a great afternoon.